Good morning. I'm glad to be here this morning. ERs are nice, but they're not fun. But Susie is doing well. She's still in a little discomfort. She has been for 38 years. but but she's probably in a little more discomfort right now. But she's doing well. Surgery was fine. They put some screws and some pop rivets and a plate in it. And so that's the way they described it to me. So anyway, any announcements that we need to make? Anybody? I don't know of anybody. Really don't. I'm trying to think. No, I don't know of anybody. Okay. All right. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 18 is where we are. Excuse me. Hope you stay safe tomorrow. Hope no spooks get you. $1 million. How are we going to win $1 million? Is what I want to know. But Ecclesiastes 5, verse 18, Solomon has been talking about it previously in the 5th chapter. He'd been talking about material possessions and really how they don't really solve a problem. They really make more of a problem than they solve. And we all think sort of the $1 million is an interesting concept. I've told you I like to watch the DIY shows, and so there's one on My Lottery Home or something, and I don't watch it. It's not one of the shows I like. But the premise is that they go out, and these folks that have won the lottery, whether they've won a huge jackpot or just a smaller one, and they go out and they're wanting a new home, and they buy a home. And it's always interesting, if the few times that I have at least seen the first part of it, is that individual wins some money, and what they want to do, they want to buy a house. And so they ask them and say, well, how much did you win? Well, I won, let's just say $500,000. And okay, what kind of house you want? I want $1 million home. Wisdom does not come with wealth. And so Solomon is saying that, and he's in that search for happiness. And he's in this chapter, he's really made more of a switch, especially really as he starts where we're starting this morning and going into the 6th chapter. And he begins to make more of a personal observation. In the first really 4.5 chapters, he's talking about here's where people look for happiness, and they can't really find it. And now he begins with, well, here's just kind of what I'm thinking. Here's some personal observations. Notice that he begins verse 18. He says, here's what I've seen. Here's what I've noticed. It's good and fitting for one to eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun, all the days of his life which God gives him, for it is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, that is the gift of God. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. Contentment. It's all right, he says. It's all right to work. It's all right to enjoy the fruits of your labor, the fruits of your work. It's all right. And it's all right to sit back and enjoy and appreciate what you've gotten from what you've earned, what you've amassed. And so Solomon doesn't condemn riches. And admittedly, I'm having to ask you to go back 2 weeks in your memory, unless you've read this or reread it this week in preparation for class, is that he's not just condemning, well, riches are evil. He says it's all right. But notice what he says at the last of verse 18. He says, for it is his heritage. It is his portion. It is his lot. But then 19 and 20 are more along the line of, you've probably heard the expression, I believe it's pronounced carpe diem, the Latin for seize the day. Excuse me. And in some ways, that's what he's saying here. He says, seize the day, take advantage of the opportunities that you have. And so he talks about man that's given riches and wealth. He's been given power to eat. He says, rejoice. This is the gift of God. And then he says in verse 20, he says, for he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joys of his heart. And so he kind of brings him back to the balance of, but there's God in all of this. And don't forget it. And notice that he's even said in this paragraph, God gives. You see, he has not excluded God. And above all things, as he writes this, and remember that he's sort of writing to his children, if you will, but it's actually, if you look at some commentaries, if you ever read commentaries and you read a commentary on Ecclesiastes, they may have the word koheleth. And one of my commentaries that I read in preparation for this, that's the Hebrew term that they use. And it comes from the very first word in the first chapter, the first verse. It's the preacher. Koheleth is just Hebrew for preacher. And so he says, the preacher says, and the preacher does this. Well, Koheleth says this, and he realizes, think about it, it's all from God. God blesses, God gives. Be thankful and be thankful to God. Anything, admittedly, that's kind of in the middle of a thought, but anything anybody'd like to add to that? To enjoy it and be content with it. Yeah, seems as if. Yeah. That seems to me to be kind of the statement that he's saying. The point. Anything else? Well, he continues talking about wealth in the 6th chapter and somewhat the idea of being discontentment. Well, let's ask the question, what would you do if you received $1 million? What would you do? My dad, used to, and yeah, you still hear about it and still see it, but, used to, years ago, everybody, right after Christmas, would get Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes, right? And there was always the promise of winning $1 million. Did not have to buy anything, right? Because, of course, now they could almost make it mandatory, because the reason you didn't have to buy anything is because that was considered gambling, that was considered illegal. Now you can gamble on anything at any time, anywhere that you want to. It's called the internet. It's also called, we've made it legal in a lot of places. But my dad always, around Christmas time, would talk about the publishers, especially when we got married, we'd grown up. My sister and I had grown up and got married. The Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. And every Christmas, Dad would talk about, well, here's what I'd do if I won $1 million. And it was funny to me, he was always very generous. Oh, I'm going to give Carol some, I'm going to give Paul some. I'm thinking, yeah, well, we'll never win. We never won. I think Dad entered, but we never won. And when Dad got a little thicker towards the last couple of years, we'd kid him then at Christmas about, what are you going to do with your $1 million? Well, what would you do? What would you do? Give to your kids, start a foundation, buy a house? Solomon deals and dabbles in that now. He talks about really how riches need to have enjoyment. He talks about the heading that a lot of folks give this is riches without enjoyment. And so I think it's important, and I think we need to be careful when we get to 1 Timothy 6, where it talks about that the lust of money, the greed of money, that money is the root of all evil, and it's not the root, it is a root, correctly translated, first of all. Second of all, yes, it leads to problems, but it's not the only thing that leads to problems, leads to sin, leads to issues. But if handled correctly, or if handled wisely and handled with God in its plan, in your plan, There's nothing wrong with wealth, nothing wrong with money. But then, of course, you have to ask yourself. Here's the question you always have to ask yourself: who's wealthy? Who's wealthy? Who do you consider wealthy? The guy next to you, but maybe in the same shape you're in. There's a man not long ago that I was talking to and thought he'd lost his wallet, and he said, "Well, that's all right. I feel sorry for the guy that gets it." He says, "That's why I keep all my credit cards pretty much close to the max, so that I can't get anything." I thought that was pretty funny, to say the least. But we look at a lot of people and we don't know how far in debt they are. They may have a lot of things, but they may be far in debt. That may be the case. They may have a lot of internal issues that they deal with. That may be their problem. But we don't know. But we do know with regards to riches, when we say, well, who's wealthy, we always consider it's the other guy. And so many times it really, as the Lord said, having food and raiment, or having food and clothing, let's be content. And that's what we need to be. But let's see what Solomon says about it. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun. Now remember, he's talking about under the sun, here upon earth. And he says, there is an evil that I've seen. He said, and it's common among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all he desires. Yet God does not give him power to eat of it, but a foreigner consumes it. This is vanity, and it's an evil affliction. Do you enjoy what you have? Do you appreciate what you have? When he talks about in verse 1, he says that a foreigner comes in and consumes it. There's 2 or 3 different ways of looking at that. But the thought is, here's a man that ever how he gathers wealth, but he doesn't sit, he doesn't enjoy it. Maybe sickness gets him, maybe other issues in life just kind of derail him. Maybe he's a miser. He's got $1, he wants 2. When he gets 2, he wants 4. When he gets 4, he wants 8. I almost said 6. That won't work. Carry me back and teach me math, Suzanne. But you understand what I'm saying? He's a hoarder with regards to money. He doesn't enjoy it. Why? Because he wants more. He wants $1 more or a penny more than what he's got now. But there's also the folks that, at whatever level they are, I want a little extra, and that'll make me happy. And they don't enjoy, Solomon says, but they let a foreigner come in. Well, there's a couple of different ways of looking at that. That may mean that they eventually have to give it all away for various sundry reasons. Or maybe they die and they leave it in a will for everybody. And that's wonderful. If you got it and you got a will and you want to put Paul Daugherty's name in, go ahead. But no, if you want to leave it to like your children, your grandchildren, or to a foundation or a nonprofit or whatever, that's your business. That's fine. But Solomon is saying, let's enjoy what we have too. Let's enjoy what we have. He says, verse 3, if a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with the goodness, or indeed he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he. No matter how much you have, it's still the repeating thought. No matter how much you have, if you don't enjoy it, you might as well not have it. And in some ways, he's saying, if you don't enjoy what you have, you might as well not have been born. That's interesting. Because usually we think of wealth, we think of like I say, the other guy has the wealth, but we think of wealth from the standpoint of it's evil. And Solomon is, of course, granted, Solomon, richest man in the world, but Solomon is not looking at it from a standpoint of an evil, but to be used, a tool, to be used wisely. I think I shared with you the story of the man that had gone on a fairly expensive vacation, and he came back, and he and his wife had been home for a day or two, and the evening came, and he starts to get out the road atlas and the pen and paper, and she said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm planning our next vacation." "Well, when are we going to take it?" "Well, soon." She said, "Well, we don't have the money. We just went on a very lavish vacation. We don't have the money." And he said, "I want my children to cry at the funeral." Well, you know, how much do you plan for your kids? How much do you plan for your grandchildren? How much do you plan for what you want to give away? Now, at the same time, too, let's think about this. If one wants to save with that intent, okay. But let it be known that Solomon says it's all right to enjoy it. It's all right to enjoy what you have. For he says in verse 4, "For it comes in vanity and departs in darkness, and its name is covered with darkness." He says it just comes in, it goes out. There's really nothing to it. Though it has not seen the sun or known anything, this is more rest than man, even if he lives 1,000 years twice, but has not seen goodness. Do not all go to one place. In other words, he says, where's he going to go? There's almost an implication here, too, that we should do as much good as we possibly can with what we have. And that's true. No one can tell you how much to give to a nonprofit, to a foundation, to a church, for that matter. And so you have to portion it out. You have to divvy it out. And admittedly, as I draw closer to retirement, I keep reading these articles about how much do you need in order to retire. And the answer to the question, really the answer to the question, just enough to get by on. But explain to me getting by. Because if you have an accident, insurance don't cover all of that. It covered a huge chunk of it. And I'm glad I had insurance. Thankful, very thankful. But, there's, and now, used to they send you bills. Now they say, we're not operating until you pay. Okay. And Suzanne said something about we put it on our credit card because I don't like people messing with my checking account. So pay off next month. And Suzanne said something about, well, if that's not right, I said, if that's not right, that gives me an extra month. Just look at it that way. We get it paid off. So, but Solomon's saying here, he says, look, he says, it comes, it goes. The foreigner, he doesn't lament the fact that he's able to use the money. Then he says, beginning in verse 7, well, wait a minute. Anything anybody want to say? Well, he talks about working now in verse 7. He says, all labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the soul is not satisfied. Now be careful. Be careful what you're working for. Are you just working for your physical appetites and not worried about your soul? Is the reason that you labor just for yourself and not for others? For what more has the wise man than the fool? What does the poor man have? Who knows how to walk before the living? The first question in verse 8, just by itself, is interesting to me. Because think about what he says. For what more does the wise man than the fool? What more does the wise man have than the fool have? All have been blessed. When I read just that verse, not in context, just read that question and think about it for a minute. I think about, remember the parable of the talents. One was given 5, one was given 2, and one was given 1. But if you go back and read that story, they were given different talents for what reason? According to their abilities. Not everybody can do as others. Some can be blessed with more wine because they know how to handle it. Others can't be blessed with as much wine because can't handle it. Now, you might say, well, preacher, you're condemning the poor. I'm not condemning the poor. And I'm not saying don't help the poor. Matter of fact, those that have much should be given or should give as much as they can. And those that have little shouldn't expect it. We work for our earnings, according to what Paul wrote to Timothy. But at the same time, too, we understand that sometimes folks do need a help and a help up. But he goes on to say, he says, what does a poor man have? Who knows how to walk before the living? Who knows how to handle this? The whole idea still is satisfaction of the soul. Labor, work needs to be with satisfaction. For he says, he continues the thought. Look at verse 9. Better is the sight with the eyes than the wandering of desire. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Better is what you have than to lust after it. I'm kind of glad that these verses right here came about this time of year. This is when the calendar for me, maybe not for you, but for me, when the calendar flips over to November, I try to spend all of November being thankful for a lot of different things and for a lot of different reasons. And I started this several years ago. And that's my thing. Doesn't have to be your thing. But if you think about what Solomon is saying here in one way, he says, look, be thankful for what you have. Whatever you have, be thankful. He says, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. Better is what you have than what you're lusting after. Better is what you see. When he talks about the sight of the eyes, better is what you see than the wandering of desire. Now, some versions may translate that word differently. Somebody have a version that instead of translating it desire, translates it soul. There are some versions that translate that word soul. And so he says, better is the sight or what you see than the wandering of the soul. This also is vanity. And then he begins with question. He says, whatever one is, he has been named already. For it is known that he is man. And he says, and he cannot contend with him who is mightier than he. Since there are many things that increase vanity, how is man the better? What increases vanity? A lot of things, right? A lot of things. I told you a couple weeks ago I had a wedding to do last night or yesterday afternoon, late, over Humphreys County, Dixon County line. And at the reception, the brother to the groom was the best man, and he got up and gave a talk. And admittedly, you'd have to know this wonderful, simple Christian family, very educated. Laura is high up in TCAT now, and the boy that got married, he's got his bachelor's degree. The boy that spoke is a junior at Tennessee Tech, studying mechanical engineering. Very smart young man as well. And he stood up and he spoke and he said, I don't like to give speeches. And that's probably right, because he told me Friday night, he said, I gave my first devotional at the Christian Student Center last week. And I was surprised. Education sometimes and growth and maturity will help you get out of your fears. The thing he said was, and the thing that I've been thinking about for so long recently, first thing he said is he gave a speech. He says, but they tell you that if you'll conquer the fear of public speaking, you will have conquered one of your greatest fears. I don't have problems talking in public, and I guess I did when we first started, but don't now. And you think about that. What's your fears? What are you going against? Solomon says here, he says, what about this? He says, why not be content? He says, there are many things that increase vanity. What increases vanity? Well, a guy that most public speakers that I know of, there is a sense of arrogance. There is a sense of overconfidence, maybe that most of us possess that we probably shouldn't. And that can turn us into vanity, vain. Solomon's, of course, talking not so much about public speaking. He's talking about money. And he says, this has the catch to it. And so he says, just be happy with what you have where you are. And then he goes on and he finishes the chapter. He says, for who knows what is man or what is good for man in life, all the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow. Who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? How does a good man know in his life all the days? Who knows what's good? And sometimes what we think's good really turns out not always good, right? You ever wanted something and maybe you got it and you thought, oh man, this is going to be good. And when you get it, then it's not worth a flip. This morning, my sweet wife, in getting her ready, okay, I need such and such shoes out of the closet. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Pulled them out. No, not those. I'm getting rid of those. Those hurt my feet terribly. Oh, but those are what you wanted. Well, I thought I did, but they hurt my feet. So I understand. I'm not condemning her for wanting to get rid of them, and I'm sorry they hurt her feet. Just for buying them in the first place. Now, I will say this, if I recall correctly, they were on sale. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. See, I always look at guys and women look at different things, right? I always look at bottom line. That's a guy thing, I think. It may be just a personal thing, maybe a personal problem. but every time Suzanne goes out and she comes home with stuff, she knows or could know or should know how much or how little is in our account. And Suzanne is not a spinster. She doesn't spend us down to the last penny. Last dollar, but not last penny. Not really. But Suze will come in and she'll have bought something. And I say, oh, that's nice. And I need to know just so I know that the money's in the right place. And I say, well, how much did that cost us? I saved you. That's not the question I asked. How much did it cost? It was on sale. It's not the question I asked. Then eventually she gets to it. Well, it cost. Okay. That's all I needed to know. I'm not upset that you bought it. I'm not mad. I just need to know that there's enough money in the right place to cover everything. We think about things differently. And people do. No matter how much money you have or don't have, you always think about things differently than the next guy. And Solomon says here, he says, let's look at it again. Look at this question. There are two questions actually in this last verse. For who knows what is good for man in life, all the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow. He tells you several things, doesn't he? He says, really, who knows what's good? It's like I say, you want this and you get it and it's not that good. And he says, really, who knows what's good? But then notice the statement with regards to life. He says, all the days of his vain life, his futile life. Solomon's take is interesting to me because his take on life seems to be more, at least to me, more upsetting than his take of wealth. Life's futile. Life's worthless. But then he goes on to say, with regards to life, which passes like a shadow. In other words, it ends, but it ends quickly. And then he asked this second question of this verse. This is actually the third question. The first question is verses 10 and 11. And this is the third question. He says, who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? Nobody. Nobody. We talked about psychics a couple of weeks ago. Nobody can tell. And he says, nobody knows. And so he's reminding really the individual. He's reminding those to whom he's speaking, those to whom he's writing. He says, look, he says, just be happy, be thankful for what you have. Use what you have, but be thankful for it. Wherever you are in life, your lot in life is, whatever tax bracket, if you will, you're in, be thankful. Be thankful. Be thankful for what you have and move forward. Now, that's an interesting take. And here's what the skeptic would say. He'd look back at that and he'd say, yeah, that's easy for the rich man to say. Because he has everything he needs. Interesting. Anything else? And who would you? Yep. That's right. Different level, but that's right. True. Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Suzanne and I know this was before Ethan. I don't know if it was before we got married or after we got married, but we went to a movie. Richard Pryor, remember him, comedian? Richard Pryor starred in a movie called Brewster's Millions. Don't know if you remember this. It was about somebody that he was kin to died. That was going to leave him a huge fortune. I can't remember the amount. But But the stipulation was that he had 30 days and he had $30 million. Basically, $1 million a day was going to be put into his account. This is the premise of the movie. It's a movie, not real life. This was meant to be funny. But he put $1 million into his account every day. And at the end of the day, especially at the end of the month, he was to have nothing to show for it. In other words, he couldn't have any personal assets of any kind. Broke or even. That was the premise of the movie. And you have to understand that the guy that left him, the kin folks, I believe his uncle, whatever, that left him was one of these tight-fisted misers individuals. And so Richard Pryor goes out and he buys things, buys all kinds of things. Hey, what are you doing? Nothing. Well, you're going to be my personal assistant. I'm going to pay you $1,000 a day, or I'm going to pay you $10,000 a day. And he went through, and the whole idea, the whole premise of the story. But then I'm going to tell you what my reaction was to the story. The whole premise of the story was that when you got to the end, you basically tell everybody getting it, and I don't have this, and so forth. So was the premise of the story is that you would learn, first of all, everybody would hate you. And second of all, you would learn that nobody's really your friend. They're only your friends because you got money. And the third thing that he was really to learn was the fact that he was to save his money and spend it because nobody else really cared about him. They just cared about his money. Now, that was the hope of the story. But I'm going to tell you what, when I walked out of there, I looked at Suzanne and I said, I've never been so tired of spending money in all of my life as I was in that movie. So the fellow that has it, needs to manage it wisely. Well, we both laughed. We both had a good time. Yeah, yeah, I think there was stuff like that. Yeah. yeah, yeah. So you know, no, no, that was part of the premise of it. You know, the old man that left him the money because he wanted to be like him. Enjoy what you have. Be content with what you have. Be content with where you are. Doesn't mean, and let's add this, and we know this, but let's add this. Doesn't mean that you can't grow. Doesn't mean that you can't get bigger, you can't get better, you can't get more, and you can't do more. It's just learning to be happy, as you go. And like I say, for me, when I look at those verses and think about them, I think about, okay, we're blessed. We're blessed to have jobs. She has retirement pension coming in as well, and very, very thankful for everything we have. Uh, I always think, well, could use more, yeah, but it always gets filled in. And so thankful with what we have where we are. And yeah, what would we do? Of course, if you ask me what would I do if I won a lottery, first thing I'd have to say is, well, I got to play it. I don't play it. Don't do it. I just there's I think it's gambling, so I don't do it. It is in my definition of gambling, and so I don't participate. And so now, yeah, yeah, right. You don't have to put anything in on. And so, if I win $1 million, everybody's always asked me, well, what would you do with $1 million? Well, I'd give some to church. Uh, I used to not say this because I didn't have a granddaughter, but I'd make sure my granddaughter, especially with her issues, that we had something set up for her. And I might give a little bit to my son. But try to make sure Sue's was carried. There'd be plenty left for Graceland. Uh, oh, after Graceland, yeah, yeah. Well, maybe. There you go. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I believe I'd still work. I'd still be at the office the next day. I'd still be on the phone. I'd still be writing notes. I'd still be going to hospitals and nursing homes and, talking to people. I'd still be doing it. I guess because I enjoy what I do. Anything else? Right. Yeah, he sees it all as futile. Trying. Yeah. 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 What are they going to do with it? The one thing that as you read this, you're going to realize he does flip a switch differently. But it's interesting what he ends up. It's interesting to me how he ends this book. If you've not read it recently all the way through, just pick up where we are and read the rest of it. We'll get there. I promise. We're marching through. Anything else? So a good name. He starts out chapter 7 now. He starts out with some practical wisdom, some practical advice. That's good. It's good. But some of it you think, never thought about it in these terms. I use chapter 7 verse 1. I use it a lot in funerals. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. A good name. We all want to have good names, right? I mean, we want people to think highly of us, to talk well of us. As a preacher, people do talk about you. Sometimes they tell the truth, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they talk disparagingly about you. Sometimes they don't, but that's true of all of us. and I use preachers because that's the avenue I come from, but that's true of all of us. Someone, well, this has happened more than once to me, but somebody will be contemplating. They've got something wrong with them, and they'll be contemplating maybe a second opinion or a different doctor, or, I like my doctor, but I don't like my doctor, so forth and so on. And then, you'll hear people as you stand around, people say, well, my doctor is Dr. So-and-so, and I really like him. Well, I wouldn't go to him. Well, why not? Or her, and use him sort of generically. I wouldn't go to him. Well, why not? Well, I heard he does so-and-so. I heard he did that. Or so I had a friend that went to him and he diagnosed this or diagnosed that or misdiagnosed this or that. And so I started trying to help people, because people look to their preacher sometimes for wisdom. They don't always get it from me, unfortunately, because I'm not that wise. But I started telling people, do your homework, find the doctor that you can have faith in and confidence in. But know this, that every one of them out there has got some stories that's not good. They misdiagnosed, they missed something. They didn't give the right dosage or right prescription, or maybe they weren't given all the facts correctly, or the tests were read one way and maybe they were wrong in the test. There's always those every doctor has some nightmarish stories out there, because that's the way we all are. We all have those nightmarish aspects in our life. And so we have to be careful. But we all want a good name. So we do what we can. We do it to the best of our ability so that we have a good name. And Solomon says, a good name is better than precious ointment. Now, understand that precious ointment in biblical times was a valuable keepsake. You didn't have banks. You didn't have Bank of Jerusalem. So oftentimes you put your money in things. Clothes was number one. Strangely, still is. But clothes was number one. But number two was such things as precious ointment, valuable ointment. Now, Solomon says here, a good name is better than precious ointment. But he says the day of death is better than the day of one's birth. And when I talk about that, when I use that in funerals, and we'll have to end here, when I use that I didn't bring a pen. When I use that in funerals, I talk about the fact that, when babies are born, everybody jumps up and down, and everybody is excited, and everybody just, can't wait and happy and should be and used to. It's not, I don't think it's so much anymore, but especially when our son was born, they played Brahms' Lullaby. Yeah, that's the name of the song. Played that on the intercom system every time a baby was born. And when Ethan was born, Suzanne told the nurse, said, well, I didn't hear Brahms' Lullaby. And the nurse, I forgot. And she ran and did it. When Ethan was born, my sister and mother came a little bit, fairly close right after Ethan was born. And my sister, who had just had her second one 5 months before Ethan was born, 6, yes, it was 6. She came more excited than we were, I think. And so people get excited, and they should. But Solomon says day of death's better. But at least right here, he's still sort of feudalistic, if you will, in his approach. Now he's going to flip, but he says day of death's better than the day of one's birth. That's pretty hard to swallow, isn't it? Anything else? Better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting, verse 2. That's an old one. We'll talk about that next week. Well, we thank you. I tell you what, let's bow for a word of prayer right quick. Father in heaven, thank you for this day. Thank you for the blessing of it. Thank you for the opportunities that have been ours today. Spend time to study your word. And we realize how at least as Solomon kind of pulls the veil back with regards to his life, that how he saw life in such a miserable way. And help us to be content with what we have. Help us to appreciate the blessings that are ours. Help us to be thankful for what we have, but help us to always look to you, and help us to always be great servants of yours, realizing that in the end, the blessings that come our way. Watch over us, bless us, and keep us. Be with those that Jay will mention in a few minutes in the announcements. Bless them and keep them in each one of them in their own particular needs and ways. Forgive us of our sins, for this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Y'all have a great week. I will talk to y'all sometime.